Hey, Amy.
Hey, Melissa.
I have great news for you.
What's that?
We have officially reached the top 10% of all podcasts.
I'm going to act like I didn't know, but I knew that. But yay! That's so exciting.
Thanks to our listeners for your dedication and support. And you can continue to help us spread awareness of dyslexia by taking a moment to like, share, and review our podcast on social media and with your friends and or coworkers.
It really helps bring our podcast to the attention of others when you do that. So it's crucial that you do that.
And it spreads awareness of dyslexia, which is helping kids, and that's what we all want to do.
That's right. So don't forget, like,
share,
review.
Thank you.
Bye. Hi, this is Amy
and Melissa. We are a couple of retired Texas teachers who are CALTs, Certified Academic Language Therapists. We started our own businesses, and now we have a podcast called The Dyslexia Duo.
So join us for our informative podcast, where we'll delve into dyslexia, covering the topics that affect parents, therapists, teachers, practitioners, and anyone who wants to learn more. We'll guide you through everything you need to know, from the first signs to the intricacies of dyslexia curriculum placement and beyond.
This season, we will cover the referral process, what to expect when your child or student is dyslexic, the generational impacts of dyslexia, and how to support those affected.
Come join us. Melissa.
Hey, Amy.
So, getting ready to listen to our upcoming podcast that we just did with Dr. Jan Hasbrouck, and I was kind of starstruck by the whole thing.
Oh, me too.
Oh my gosh. She said your name 3 times. I was keeping tally marks. She said, well, Melissa, and I was like, dang, I only have one. I only got one Amy this whole time. But I was just so starstruck. And we had this whole list of questions, and she answered every single one of them, and I learned so much. And she has a new book out, and now I'm going to make it part of my syllabus for training. So what did you think of this episode?
I learned so much as well, and she is incredibly kind and loving. You could tell she has so much passion. I'm excited to read her book, Climbing the Ladder of Reading and Writing.
And she talked about being the awardee for the Samuel Torrey Orton Award from IDA, which is kind of a big deal, which we'll be at as Man on the Street with our podcast. But I'm looking forward to hearing her acceptance speech, because she talked about all the people in her life that she was grateful for that led her on this path as well.
I know, and we get to see her at IDA coming up in October. We are totally going to be fangirls.
Oh, to the hill. We're going to have to make posters and hold them over our head. We have to do it for Dr. Mather too. She's going to be there too. So we'll have 2 different sets of posters, and we'll just wave it and woo, like we're at a concert.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. So let's not delay. Let's go ahead and head into the episode with Dr. Jan Hasbrouck. Hi, this is Amy.
And Melissa.
And we're the Dyslexia Duo. So today we're here with Dr. Jan Hasbrouck, and you may recognize her name. And if you don't, you should recognize her name, because to say it like the kids do, kind of a big deal. So I'm going to let her go ahead and introduce herself to our audience.
Well, thank you both, Amy and Melissa. I'm glad to be here. Jan Hasbrouck. I am an educator. That's what I do, and I've been doing this for quite a while. I started off long ago, many decades ago now, as a reading specialist, and it was important trajectory of my career that after about 15 years or so of doing that, my role switched to being a coach, and that led me to all kinds of discoveries. The first discovery being I had no idea how to be a coach. There was no training or anything involved. I didn't even have the title of coach. I was just told, okay, you're not going to work with kids anymore. You're going to go help teachers. And okay, I'll see what that looks like. So that led me to back to the university, actually, to ended up getting a doctoral degree and studying coaching for quite a while. But my interest and love of all things literacy never went away. So although I was pursuing coaching and doing a lot of research in coaching, I continued to do work in literacy. When I was a professor, I worked at University of Oregon first and then Texas A&M University. And since then, in the 2000s, most of my work has been writing books, working as a consultant with schools and agencies in the United States, but also internationally, which is very exciting. Yeah, so that's the kind of work I do. Most of my work has been focused throughout these years. When I say all things literacy, my focus has actually been rather narrow. My interest from the very beginning were students who struggle with learning to read, including students with dyslexia. So although across the grades I work with that, I'm really particularly interested in the early grades where we help students get launched as readers, intervene as early as possible. I think the research is very much confirming how important that is. We'll always be ready to provide intervention and remediation as necessary, but the research that keeps coming to say that if we identify these children as early as possible and provide age-appropriate and skill-appropriate interventions, we can prevent all kinds of challenges from happening in reading and writing and spelling. So yeah, that's kind of what I do.
That's awesome. And I can... we were chatting before we started recording about how things change so much. Yeah. I've done some form of dyslexia intervention since 92. And I can remember, at least in Texas, and I know Texas is kind of a different state in the way of dyslexia and how we identify and all that. But we weren't identifying kids until third grade. And I remember actually getting a little nervous when a parent of a kindergartner would come up to me and say, hey, we've got a family history of dyslexia, and I'm concerned that my child is dyslexic. And I would get a little sweaty because I wasn't sure what to tell them to do, because I knew my district wouldn't assess that soon. But we know so much more now about how young children learn to read.
That's right. And that we don't worry. I think the research that's compelling to me are those researchers who are saying, let's not get hung up on identifying whether a student has dyslexia or not dyslexia, which is kind of hard to do before third grade. That's one of the reasons we waited, is we felt we had to say, yeah, your struggles are caused by this thing we're going to call dyslexia. I think in the last 10, 15 years, we've really turned the corner on that to say, wait a minute, if we don't worry so much about the causal factors, what we have learned in 50 years or more of research is that the intervention is the same. It's tailored to what are the skills you're struggling with. Some kids may be struggling with reading because of language issues or some aspect of word recognition. And of course, we individualize it that way, not to say all kids are exactly the same, but those cognitive researchers, Stanislaus Dehaene and Mark Seidenberg and so many others are saying, we've really looked at the brain, and all brains do learn to read the same way. All brains have to be rewired, and components of the brain need to be repurposed for recognizing print and all of those kinds. And the differences are that some brains do that with great ease, some with normal expected ease or challenge, and some, including our children who really do have a language-based disorder that we can call dyslexia, that brain reorganization is super hard for them. But we don't need to wait. We just say, we have better and better tools where we can say with a great deal of confidence who's at risk. And when we think you're at risk at age 5, we do something about it.
It makes all the difference, as you said earlier. I agree. So if you could tell me a little bit about, with all your expertise, how would you define dyslexia?
I just think that the evidence is very clear. And I've heard nobody with any that I would hold up as an expert. Nobody disagrees that some brains are born with some kind of feature that makes learning to read and write and spell extraordinarily difficult. And researchers like the Shawitzes, who have been looking at this for many, many decades, and now the work of Nadine Gabb and so many different people, that there are brain anomalies, neurobiological anomalies that do seem to be genetic. The work of some of the folks working in the genetic aspects of trying to figure out what are the genes, at least to date, are concluding there's not a gene that we're going to be able to identify. There are clusters of genes and different genes, but it is heritable. You do see this brain-based neurobiological disorder passed along in families. So we know that is true for some children. My daughter has dyslexia. There is traceable dyslexia in our family. That aspect is really clear to me. It's a language-based disorder. It has to do with the part of the brain that has primarily, we also know that dyslexia has different dimensions and people manifest with dyslexia differently, but primarily it has to do with the brain's difficulty in recognizing individual phonemes in speech. The work of the Libermans, who first really, I think they were the first people who said, you know what, we need to look at auditory aspects of reading. It's For decades, we focused on the eyes, and there are a lot of theories about the eyes and the eye processing in both hemispheres of the brain and that kind of thing. And the Libermans said, no, we think it's something about how these brains are recognizing and processing sounds in spoken words and then translating that. And that seems to be where a lot of the focus of research has been over the last few years. So that's not the simple, 24-word definition that I can roll off for you, but those are the elements that I think are true. But I also so strongly agree with Jack Fletcher and Nadine Gabb and so many others who are saying, yes, those kids do exist. I know that. I've got one. But we don't need to do all these machinations to find those kids, because at the end of the day, we don't treat them differently. The evidence is that essentially good instruction is good instruction, as long as we differentiate it to make sure we're giving sufficient focus and time on the skill areas that certain students will need.
Yeah, I don't think it's really a 24-word diagnosis either, is it? It's a very difficult, complex disorder that kids have. And I agree with you wholeheartedly about the instruction and how it needs to be quality instruction as well. And the school districts really are doing, I think, making improvements in getting those kids identified a little bit earlier. And this is so instrumental, having things like this available to people to listen to and advocate. Hopefully parents will be better advocates for their children to get the different instruction that they need for their child.
Right.
How, in your opinion, or in your studies, not necessarily your opinion, but in what you've researched, how does multisensory instruction or structured literacy support those with dyslexia or students who are struggling to read? In my career, even though I work from a curriculum, I know I'm going to differentiate. I know I'm going to be prescriptive. And I know that even though I might have two groups starting in the same place, I'm going to treat how I work with those groups differently just because of who the children are. And they're going to have different needs because dyslexia exists on a continuum. So how does multisensory instruction or structured literacy, how does it help our students?
Let's just start with structured literacy as a relatively new term. I am very grateful for the work that IDA has done in helping create that terminology, compiling together in this one term the multifaceted dimensions that decades now of research has said is important. We should always be talking about and focusing on comprehensive instruction that covers all of the areas. I mean, we can think just simply about Scarborough's rope. Comprehensive instruction needs to deal with all of that. It is not about phonics. It's not just about phoneme awareness. It has to be comprehensive. We know it also has to be systematically designed. That's decades of research say when we're more carefully design instruction, we choose a good scope and sequence. We also know researchers have given up trying to find the scope and sequence. There's not one, but there are ones that are much, much better than others. And we have to use that design and how many examples do we give? What is the scope? What's the sequence of things? We also know that explicitly delivered instruction, when students are acquiring a new skill, especially one as complex as learning to read, if we are rarely very explicit, showing the students what we want them to do, providing mountains of guided practice and assisted supportive practice. We know that works. We know that when this is all supported by good data, students do better. So instead of just talking about using every time, be sure we're doing comprehensive, systematic, explicit, intensive, data-informed instruction that has a multisensory aspect about it. We can just say, let's do structured literacy. But we have to be sure that we're using that term in a similar way. Like any time in education seems we come up with a new term, people start being creative with it, using it different ways. But I'm really comfortable with it and I like it. And I think it's a nice streamlined way of talking about this very multifaceted aspect of both what we're teaching, the comprehensive aspect about it, and how we're teaching it. That what and how together also is part of structured literacy. And within that, there are some aspects of what we're now calling structured literacy that there is just tremendous research support for. Things like explicit instruction. I did my original undergrad work in my master's program, the start of my doctoral program at the University of Oregon, which is really the foundation. Those were the people I got to work with when I first started learning to teach, who came up with this notion of explicit direct instruction. They kind of invented it and they studied it. And that was 50 years ago and found that it worked. And it has 50 years of evidence to show that when we show students provide guided practice and independent practice at the dosage and level that is necessary, kids are going to learn. Even kids with severe learning challenges will learn. So that one aspect, the systematic design, the comprehensive. One aspect, though, of structured literacy, that multisensory, is getting some new attention. And some of the research that's coming out is making some of us rethink how we've been using that term. Much of what we've been doing around multisensory instruction was based not on research, but on theory. Theories that if kids have dyslexia, that using reinforcing their instruction by using tactile simulations and those kinds of things, that's all going to make their learning better. And then people have been studying it. And just recently, there was a meta-analysis done by Liz Stevens and others who looked at all the studies available on multisensory and found that actually, much of what we're calling multisensory instruction really does work, but it works because it's systematically designed and explicit instruction. It's not the sandpaper letters, the shaving cream, the rice trays, those kinds of things. There has been a belief in the field of dyslexia that it is those tactile supports that are necessary. And let's just acknowledge, I mean, we've already said these kids are different. They're all different. And there may be a child for whom, and especially if you have serious attentional challenges, doing things like tracing sandpaper letters or something may be helpful for an individual child. But to the belief that was prevalent for a long time, that if you have dyslexia, you need these kind of tactile supports, has really been disproven. But what I really appreciate is people pointing out that good instruction, although it may not be multi-sensory in a tactile way, it should be multimodality. Yep. We've known that if we present information to children or any learner, but especially children, that is auditory, visual, they hear it, they see it, they say it, and the tactile kinesthetic part is writing it. When we do that, when we incorporate all the modalities of learning into each lesson, our students do better. So if we do just a little tweak on this notion that we're not going to say, oh, multisensory, but rather than that term, which has gotten to be associated with tactile supports, kinesthetic supports, I really appreciate this sort of the shift in the term. Let's use the term multimodality, and we can all agree because of evidence. Like you say, we don't have to talk about beliefs. We have evidence for this, that supports learning.
That's awesome. Thank you. So I love that because I'm sitting here thinking, I'm taking all this in and I'm writing it down. I'm like, I have teachers I'm training in a couple of weeks. I'm going to bring some of this up with them. So I really appreciate all of that.
I kind of wanted to piggyback on what you were talking about with structured literacy. Does structured literacy include Orton Gillingham? Or are you saying that Orton Gillingham is still kind of separate from structured literacy?
Well, different people are going to think of it in different ways. I'm looking at the work that Barbara Wilson and so many people have been doing within IDA to really do a very careful, thoughtful look at the newest research, the highest quality research, and trying to tease out the truths, if you will, of that, and then presenting it back to practitioners in a way that is accurate and intelligible and useful. And so I think that I would have to ask Barbara and others who are involved in that definitional work what their thinking was on incorporating or not incorporating Orton Gillingham. My sense of when I talked to Barbara and the others, I mean, it wasn't Barbara alone, but she took a great leadership in that, the work of Margie Gillis and so many others. I think the shift is let's be brave and be willing to let go of things we've believed and look at the best evidence that we have from science, whether it aligned with our former beliefs or not. Let's wipe the slate clean and just look at what has the strongest evidence. And what has the strongest evidence gives us guidance for what should we be teaching and how we should be teaching it. And that incorporating all of that in this relatively new label of structured literacy, to me, it's kind of a fresh start. There will be people who feel like it hasn't accommodated the way they used to do things that has worked for them. And whatever you can call it Orton Gillingham, you can call it different things. One of the strengths, I think, one of the benefits of structured literacy is its newness. And if we're diligent about trying to keep to a shared definition, it avoids the things like what has happened, in my opinion, and I'm certainly not, this is not particularly my field, I haven't really studied it, but it seems to me what's happened to the term Orton Gillingham is that that's one of those terms or labels that lots of people have said, we're Orton Gillingham. Oh, we're Orton Gillingham.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, our organization is Orton Gillingham. There's not a central group that says, oh, yeah, no, you're not actually true to the principles of Orton Gillingham. I think moving away from Orton Gillingham, because it has gotten less clear about what it really is.
Right.
So yes, we can be very thankful and grateful for the original work of Sam Orton and Gillingham and the incredible pioneering work they did that has set us on this path today. It got conflated. It got
confusing a little bit.
But yeah, so, recognize that's the history. That's our history. But where we are today is structured literacy, the agreement around strong evidence-based of those components within structured literacy.
I appreciate that clarification because I feel like it's a little confusing being in this field for so many years. And now I'm seeing all these terms thrown around and I just feel a little bit confused. And I'm thinking all of us want to be doing the right thing for kids. If we're in this field and we're providing services to children, we all want to be doing what's best for kids.
Absolutely.
So if you're hearing Orton Gillingham, then you hear structured literacy and which one is the right one? Which one's the best one? That's where I feel like I'm like, okay, I need to know the answer from the real experts about this. So I appreciate that.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
Hi, this is Melissa with Kids First Dyslexia Services. I am excited to share with you my private practice. Kids First Dyslexia Services is a private practice that specializes in dyslexia therapy. Each one-on-one session focuses on instruction specific to your child's needs in a nurturing environment that develops self-esteem, builds confidence, and fosters a sense of accomplishment, resulting in happier kids with higher levels of achievement. We provide a professional, personalized experience, always putting the child first. We value the relationships with both our students and parents because strengthening skills and overcoming hurdles to achieve desired goals and success is a team effort. For more information, please visit www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com. That is www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com.
Hi there. This is Amy Rodenroth, owner of Discovery Dyslexia Services. So tell me if any of these situations are familiar to you. Your dyslexia teacher / therapist has suddenly retired unexpectedly, and you do not have the personnel to fill the space. Or you do not have enough trained teachers or therapists for the number of students who have qualified for dyslexia services, and you need a trained teacher or therapist quickly, like yesterday quickly. Or you need a teacher to provide compensatory services, and you do not have anyone that can provide what's needed. Well, what do? I'm going to tell you what you can do. You can call Discovery Dyslexia Services. Discovery Dyslexia Services can help you with your various dyslexia concerns. We have multiple CALTs who can provide virtual small group therapy. We can also train your teachers in most dyslexia curricula, either virtually or on site. Just let us know how we can help support you. For more information, go to our website at www.discovereed.com. Let me spell that for you. DyscovereAD.com. And I know it's a funny name, but we're providing huge services for our dyslexic population. So keep in mind, Discovery Dyslexia Services, covering all your dyslexia needs. Let's return to the show. What would, in your opinion, in your thoughts, in our years as educators, we've had to talk about dyslexia to various groups. So, sometimes you have to explain what it is to the classroom teacher that, I don't want to say they don't really believe in it. I mean, it's not a thing to believe or not believe, but how would you explain dyslexia to a classroom teacher? This is her first time. I can remember doing trainings for campuses. And I'd say, okay, everybody needs to come and do this dyslexia awareness for the campus, and I'd have a teacher say, well, I don't have any dyslexic students. I'm like, well, you do. You just don't know who they are yet. So how would you explain dyslexia to a teacher?
Well, in my book that I wrote about dyslexia, I did use the most current definition from IDA that every few years gets re-examined and hopefully incorporates our evolving and best information about what dyslexia is. So I think, and it's complex definition, a couple of sentences long, but I think sharing that and then going through it word by word. So it does talk about a neurobiological condition. I don't know if in the definition it talks about it being on a continuum or a spectrum. So we have to definitely mention that to teachers too, that there's severe dyslexia, and then there's very mild dyslexia that may only manifest in some spelling problems, but the children become actually pretty good readers. And talking about for most children with dyslexia, it has a phonological component. It's that aspect of their brain, that it has nothing to do with intelligence. It has nothing to do with gender. We used to believe some things about that, but we now know that no matter what your intellect, you can have dyslexia. You can be a boy or a girl and have dyslexia, that you're born with this condition, but that instruction is the intervention. The other mythology I also want to always talk to teachers and parents about is the eye issue. It's not a visual issue. Children who are blind can have dyslexia. It's not a visual issue at all. We thought for decades and decades that it was. So there are leftover beliefs about that. And there are some people, professionals, they may be a little bit nefarious, but they will sell eye treatments, eye exercises, certain colored lenses for glasses, or those kind of things to parents, and say, this is the answer. And we have to advise and support our teachers that that's not. Although there are children with dyslexia who may have visual issues, they may have visual coordination issues, they may have issues with their eyesight. So we have to take those into consideration, but that's not what we call dyslexia. And we as instructors don't focus on the eyes when we're doing the instruction. What we focus on is helping those brains connect the auditory sounds in words to print. That aspect that we all have to learn that connection in order to learn to read and write. Children with dyslexia can learn that. It's just for them, it's going to be more challenging. It's going to take longer, but we can do it.
Yes, absolutely. And so interestingly enough, on my way up to my office for the recording, I was talking to a parent on the phone that I'm working with. And she's a parent educator. But she was talking a little bit about dyslexia. And she goes, even as an educator, I don't know all the things I should know. And I'm like, sister, I'm right there with you. I don't know all the things I should know, honestly. But what about that parent who isn't the teacher, who isn't in the educational system? How could we explain that to a parent? And I'm not saying, bring it down, but in a way that they could understand, not being in the educational world.
Talking to them about the fact that learning to read and write and spell is a big ask for every brain. Nobody is born with the ability to do that, although some children acquire that. Very small number of children, but there are some children who essentially teach themselves to read. But the most of the rest of us, our brains need to be taught. And what reading is, at its very basic, is helping recognize that this verbal spoken language that we have learned naturally without instruction, that we've learned a way to represent that in print. In our language, we use an alphabetic code. And learning to read and write involves learning the connection between the speech and the printed code. Children with dyslexia have a more difficulty doing that, not because they're not trying hard enough, not because they're not smart. And some of our children with dyslexia are super smart. It's that their brains don't as easily make that connection between the spoken language and the print. But the good news is we know how to teach that. We teach that. That is what teachers are teaching in every kindergarten, in every first grade classroom, in every second grade classroom. But when our children, if I'm talking to a parent, your child is getting that same instruction, but the amount of instruction, the level of instruction that's going to help their classmates become readers fairly quickly, your child is going to get there. But that instruction, we need a whole lot more of it. It needs to be more intensive. I would certainly want the message to be powerful, to be positive. And then any questions that they might have about the why, we're still trying to figure that out, why your child's brain is working that way. There's a lot of theories and they're quite complex. But again, the good news is the answer is instruction. Showing your child lots and lots and lots of practice, keeping them encouraged, and continuing to build their language, because their ability to read and write and spell is going to be based on their vocabulary, their background knowledge and experiences. So I would also want to talk to the parent. If I knew their child's language background, I would want them to talk about that, because that's one way also that parents can continue to support their children at home, is that reading to the children, making sure they have, the experiences with language and speech and just experiences with life to build that background knowledge. All of that can make once they do break the code, and they will, we're going to get there, all that language is what we tap into. So that's a part that parents can play really easily. Just keep reading to your children, keep talking to your child, keep giving them wonderful experiences out in the world.
That's perfect. And when I would be in ARDS or 504s in my past, I would tell parents, read with your children, you take a page, they take a page, listen to audiobooks, and they're like, isn't there more I can do? I'm like, well, yeah. I always said that if I could take my students on field trips, once a month, I'd do it, but can't do that. But, so how would you tell either a teacher or a parent how to explain dyslexia to a child? And it could be a child in elementary or maybe even in secondary. So let's just split the difference and say fifth grade.
Well, we do have to say that to a child that all brains are different, and all brains, some things that they're particularly good at and some things that they are find a little bit harder. Some people are just artists and art, and to be able to draw or sing or play music, their brain just does that so easily, those lucky people. Some brains are just really, really good at spatial relationships. They, once they start learning things like geometry or even crafting things, they're just really good at that. Some brains are really, really good at reading, and some brains aren't. So your brain, if I'm talking to a child who has struggles with dyslexia, and I would often, and what I try to do with children is, before we talk about their dyslexia, what is your brain really good at? And kids they all know what they're good at. I met with a little girl this summer, and she said her superpower was her social skills. She just said, I'm really good. And she knows what she's talking about. She's just gregarious and fun and social and extroverted. And she was saying the reason I was working with her is her parents suspected, she was a fourth grader going into fourth grade, suspected she had dyslexia. And the whole family was really focused on this, including her, because her sister was one of those gifted readers, 2 years older, had learned to read before kindergarten, just so we could compare her to her sister. She said, my sister is so good at reading, but she's just no good with people at all. She just She said, if the mailman comes to the front door, she runs. And so we were able to talk about strengths and varying difficulties, and the acknowledgement that your brain, for some reason, has to work harder. It's not impossible, but it's harder to make those connections, which makes reading words harder. It makes spelling words harder. It makes reading text harder to read fluently, which then makes understanding or comprehension a little bit more difficult. But all those things can get better with practice. Even if you're not good at math, you can get good at math with practice. If reading is hard, you can help your brain, but you have to exercise it. You have to work it. So those are the kind of conversations I would have, not getting much more technical than that, unless the child wanted. If they wanted, if they are asking for the layers of why is that happening, and we can give answers about those things. But I find visuals too, like Scarborough's rope and Nancy Young's ladder of reading and writing, to show that different kids, just their brains, and that infographic is really all about the ease of learning to read and write. And we can and I did that with that little girl. I said, your sister's up here in the green. She's one of those kids. Her brain works really well at reading. This is only about reading. You're down here. And we looked at that. She said, I think I'm in the red. And I had assessed her by that point. And I said, I don't think you're in the red. I think you're maybe in the orange. So that reading is kind of difficult, more difficult than all these other kids, but I don't think your brain has to work as hard as the kids in the red. So those are the kinds of things. I do think the visuals help, and the talking about the strengths and the differences in brains. But once again, Amy, always coming back to the positive, that instruction, learning, practice, you can get there. And that's what we're all here to help you do that.
And I think it's so important when you're in it, when you're dyslexic and you just don't feel like you're having a lot of success with the school. I think we need to remind our students, our own children, what they're good at, because you get stuck in your own head so often.
Yeah. Oh, you do. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
No doubt. It's awful. I mean, I always have that conversation with these kids too. This sucks.
Yeah.
It's much easier. I'm not particularly good at math. And the fact that I'm not particularly good at math just wasn't that big a deal. When you're not good at reading, writing, and spelling, it's the worst.
Yes,
it's like, let's just cry. Let's hug it out. This is, it's just a darn yucky thing.
Because you have to read to do anything.
Now let's talk about the positives. This is what it's to be in reading, and here's where you are in reading, and I know you want to be here, and we're going to work to get you there. But yeah, acknowledging that it sucks. It's awful.
Thank you for that.
So as far as the language therapy is concerned, once we do a lot of the interventions with the kids, we teach them how to decode words, and they start getting their automaticity with reading words, at least the decoding part. Where I struggle, this is always where I feel like it comes in the last, is the fluency. That fluency piece is one of the hardest things for me in my therapy practice to remediate. So I wondered if you could explain a little bit, what is fluency and how can we help?
I'm happy to do that. Fluency has been a real focus of my research work, and that came out of, as all my work has done, out of my practical, my work with actual children, because like you, Melissa, I found that I had a good toolkit and the skills and knowledge to teach pretty much all my children, all my students, to learn how to decode and understand sentences. And I could get them up to a certain level, but then they sort of hit a wall. Mm-hmm. And for many of our students with dyslexia, fluency is the wall that they hit. And what we now understand fluency, or I prefer to call it passage reading fluency, because that term fluency, we use it with talking about our fluidity or fluency with language. We talk about fluency with math facts. Fluency can mean different things. So being really specific about what we're talking about here is passage reading fluency. Some researchers call it text reading fluency. It's the same thing. So what it is, the ability to read a passage fluently requires three basic components. And the first that we always need to talk about first, I always use the term first, foremost, and forever. It's accuracy that we need to be talking about. Accuracy often is treated as the sort of secondary component of fluency, and it is absolutely not. It is the foundation of fluency. So we have to, if you're a fluent reader, you can read with reasonable accuracy. And we know what that is. Researchers who have narrowly targeted and zoomed in on accuracy have come up with the number. It's always a range because we're talking about human beings reading all different kinds of text. But in general, we have to be about 98% accurate in our reading. We have to know about, and sometimes the range goes as low as 95%, but that's as low as it is. If you're reading text and you are not able to recognize and know the meaning of, understand 5% of your text, you will not understand what you've read. Really have to be minimum 95, more solidly fluent, we would have an accuracy level of about somewhere around 98%. So accuracy is the component. You can read and understand the individual words that the text is comprised of. The second component, and it's right there after accuracy, it is a major part of fluency, but that is rate. Speed sometimes, how quickly you read, but rate is a more technical term because we don't want to talk about reading speed. It's not about how fast you read. It's an appropriate rate. So it's reasonable accuracy at an appropriate rate. And the appropriate rate that we hope our students get to is closer and closer and closer to the rate of spoken language. Because the whole reason we care about fluency, the reason fluency is essential and important is because of comprehension. We want our students to be fluent because when you're fluent, you have a far greater possibility of understanding what you're reading. So we build on that accuracy. We incorporate rate, but not as fast as possible, only move it toward sounding like speech. And the third component of passage reading fluency is expression, or prosody, which, like accuracy, is all about helping us read so in a way that reflects spoken language so that our brain recognizes what the print means. We would all do a much better job if we never disconnected any conversations about fluency, if we keep those conversations connected to comprehension. It's all about comprehension. Fluency is all about comprehension. And too often we treat it as this separate thing. Let's just get kids reading. No, we get them reading always for comprehension at the word level. As soon as we're reading words, we need to teach our students that these words carry meaning and phrases carry meaning and text carries meaning. And then our job on top of that is to make sure that we're doing the instruction to lay that foundation of accuracy, helping our students reach that level of automaticity. That term automaticity is really the marriage of accuracy and rate. That's what automaticity is. And then prosody or expression is kind of the icing on the cake, the layer on top of it. You take accurately read text at an appropriate rate and then make it prosodic, make it mirror spoken language. That's beautiful. But the work, especially with our children with dyslexia, it's not prosody that we worry about. It's the accuracy and the rate. And the reason that will always, always be a factor in dyslexia is because another aspect of dyslexic brains is they don't process as quickly smoothly, effortlessly, accurately as non-dyslexic brains. In fact, I remember finding it really fascinating to understand that in other languages, especially languages that are far more transparent or regular than English, which is almost all languages, but there are languages in the world that are highly transparent, super regular. And there's dyslexia in those languages. There's dyslexia everywhere in the world. But children with dyslexia learning to read in a highly transparent language often have no problems up until about third grade. They learn to decode quite readily. Decoding is just not so challenging when you've got a highly regular or highly transparent language, such as Spanish, Finnish, Korean. There are many. But once they start reading text, they often are not able, without a great deal of effort, to maintain the fluency levels of their non-dyslexic neurotypical peers. It manifests as a fluency problem only or primarily. So the fact that our kids struggle with the decoding part, learning to read, and then fluency is not a surprise. Although in English, we focused so much on dyslexia being a problem with decoding, it is also a problem or a challenge with fluency. And the spectrum aspect of dyslexia plays a role in here too, because we can help quite a few of our students with dyslexia become pretty fluent, but there are some who are never going to be able to read at the level of speech. They're just not, despite our best efforts. That's going to be the limit. But we keep working on it. We keep working on those components, not just reading faster, but the accuracy rate and expression in the service of comprehension. We can help most students get fairly fluent, and some reach typical or normal or expected levels of fluency, but some may never get there because of their dyslexia.
Interesting.
Thank you for that.
Couple of things. I was taking notes crazily while you were discussing this, and you were talking about rate. And we do fluency practice in dyslexia therapy settings. Some of my kids use it, whatever is included in the curricula. Sometimes I do the read naturally with my students, which does have the questions after it, which makes sense now that you say it. Now I understand. But I have one little boy that I work with who, and I know he's not supposed to trade rate for accuracy, but I cannot get him to slow down. And I joke around. I'm like, dude, you're going to pass out. You need to take a breath while you're reading. And he does. He sounds like a cattle auctioneer. And I had put that in my notes because I'm like, okay, hold on. We're not in Fort Worth Rodeo. You're not auctioning off a cow or anything like that. Slow down. So how could I try to model for him? I said, it should sound like your speech. It shouldn't be, because you don't talk like that. What else could I do to help ease him along with that? Maybe, I don't know, other than repetitions.
I would give him harder text.
Okay.
He's got the speed down.
Yeah.
Check speed. So what are the aspects of fluency? It's accuracy, rate, and expression. Fluency practice or instruction is like going to the gym. There's a certain amount of practice that needs to be done, and it needs to be done at an appropriate level. But if you're going to build your fluency muscle, just like going to the gym, you got to work on stuff that's just a little harder than you can already do. We used to believe, and I know I was taught this, we should do fluency practice on independent level text. When you're off by yourself, totally by yourself, independent text makes a whole lot of sense. But when you're in an instructional situation, instruction means you're learning something. So what does that student not do? He's reading words too easily.
Yeah.
Let's make it harder for him. And Tim Shanahan has written quite a bit about that, cites studies where students make significant gains when they are receiving instruction in really challenging text. But we're not just, practice this hard text over and over until you lay the foundation of accuracy. So give him something that he can't read. Help him slowly as necessary, learn what the words are sentence by sentence. Good. Now you know those words. Now read that sentence fluently. Good. Now let's go on to the next sentence and make sure you know all those words. Now read that sentence fluently. Now read the two sentences fluently. He's working his accuracy muscle. He's learning new words. He's learning to read more complex sentences. That's what needs to happen for that student. Just if in telling him he can read fast and he wants to read fast, so it's too easy.
Okay, that helps me a lot, honestly. And then another thing, while you were talking, I think about going to IEP meetings or ARD meetings, and they say the student will read the given text with 80 to 85% accuracy. And if our accuracy should be 95 to 98%, they're missing a lot of meaning within that given text.
Oh my gosh. Yes, you could do this at an ARD meeting if you needed to convince somebody. Take a passage of, not super hard, but text that we should all be able to read and block out 15% of the text and ask somebody what that text means. You don't know, right? Unless you're just taking out the little tiny words, but you block out meaning words. And you block out 5% of the meaning-based vocabulary words you cannot understand it. I do that in my workshops. I have passages that I don't block out the words, but the words are unfamiliar. I have a medical text, and most of us can decode the word, but that's only half the battle. You need to know what the word means, and it's a small little. It's like 30 words. And there's about 5 of them that none of us know.
Yeah.
You just read, 90-some% of that text, and you can't tell me what it means.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not 80. I don't know where 80 and 85 came from.
I don't know. I think people think, that sounds like an attainable goal. Yeah. It's up there, but not. Yeah.
We've just used it for so long, but we have evidence. We have research evidence that says it's 95 is the minimum for comprehension.
I think we need to play this clip before anybody walks into an ARD now. Everybody understands that. That concludes part 1 of our interview with Dr. Jan Hasbrouck. Join us next time for part 2, and we can hear a little bit more about fluency norms. The Dyslexia Duo podcast hosts are Amy Rodenroth,
Melissa Dean.
Our producer is Greg Rodenroth.
You can find us on Facebook at The Dyslexia Duo.
Email us any questions or comments at thedyslexiaduo@gmail.com.
Awareness is so important. Share this podcast with your friends,
family,
and teachers.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.